Personal Event is privileged to bring to you Vineet Sambre, Head of Equity at DSP Mutual Fund. Vineet holds over 20 years of experience in the Indian capital markets, particularly on the equity side of asset management. He is a commerce graduate and a chartered accountant from the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Vineet joined DSP Investment Managers in July 2007 as a portfolio analyst for the firm's PMS division, which manages discretionary accounts and provides advisory services to institutional clients. As a research analyst, his focus was on sectors like pharmaceuticals, power, utilities, chemicals, fertilizers, and textiles. Previously, Vineet was with DSP Merrill Lynch as an equity strategist. He rose through the ranks and went on to become the head of equities at DSP Investment Managers in 2018. Currently, at DSP Mutual Fund, he actively manages the DSP Mid Cap Fund, DSP Small Cap Fund, DSP Top 100 Equity Fund, DSP Focus Fund, and DSP Healthcare Fund. Cumulatively, in these 5 schemes, Vineet manages assets over 25,500 crore, and he specializes in the small and the mid-cap space and has a rich experience. Before joining DSP, Vineet was employed with IRNFS Investmart Limited as an equity analyst in their PMS division. He also worked with UTI Investment Advisory Services as an equity analyst for the offshore fund, the India Growth Fund. Vineet, thanks for joining, and we'll discuss today navigating the waves of COVID-19. So my first question to you is, when the novel coronavirus or COVID-19 cases were reported in Wuhan, China, towards the end of the calendar year 2019, did you envisage it spreading to the rest of the world, turning out to be a pandemic and causing a havoc?
So thank you, Ronak, and good evening to all of you. I just hope each one of you who's listening to me is keeping well and safe. These are very difficult times for all of us. And thank you, Ronak, for inviting me today, and thank you for that long introduction as well.
Thank you, Vineet. Thank you.
So let me just start off with your first query about the the first infection turning out to be a pandemic. So I think, frankly, this is something which we are witnessing. It's a once in a century type of an event, and never ever sort of experienced in our lifetimes. So obviously, it was not at all possible for us to think that we are going to be dealing with an event which is going to see such a big impact or a magnificent impact as far as the pandemic is spread of the pandemic is concerned. And while we were trying to look at the news flows coming out of China, the way they were shutting down provinces and then the virus spreading, but it was more like an epidemic and not assume that this will turn out to be a big pandemic. And frankly, while we were sort of again going through that phase, one thing the realization which came was this was something which is an emergency type of a situation, and we will see how things turn out. But for sure, I think it was giving signals of emergency type of a situation. And now that we are dealing with the pandemic, I think this is second wave. I think things are in much better shape and form than what we earlier were fearing, actually.
Right. Because I remember the first case of COVID-19 in India was reported in Kerala somewhere in January 2020. And in the financial capital, the first case was in mid-March. And 2 weeks later, Prime Minister Modi announced a nationwide lockdown. And the equity markets tumbled or hit a low of 25,981 on the 23rd of May 2020. How did this impact the equity-oriented mutual funds, particularly the ones which you manage? And what were the measures taken from a risk management point of view to reduce this negative impact of the COVID-19 wave?
Yeah, I think this is very important question, Ronak. And so, as a person actually who's been sort of looking at equities for more than 20 years now, the good part is that I started my career just before the .com bust actually happened. So witnessed some of these major drawdowns, the dot-com, then the 2008 Lehman crisis, 2013-14 taper tantrum, and then now the one of the mega events in a way, which actually big cuts which we saw in the markets. And I think in line with those cuts, the most of the funds actually saw themselves correcting, some by more than the index, some by less than the index. So I would say that in terms of the risk, I think the risk is not to manage the portfolio keeping in mind a specific risk which could unforeseen risk which would emerge, because I think these events will keep coming after 6, 7, 8 years, and you will be impacted by that. But more importantly, the risk management is a journey, and in that journey, how we try to deal with such situation is to sort of focus a lot more on the quality of companies which we are sort of holding in the portfolio. This is something which is very important, because what we have observed is, if you are actually backing a good quality company and a good quality business, it does well generally over a long period of time. It does underperform in a raging bull market, because you have some of the inferior businesses doing well. But in such drawdown phases, it also tends to outperform. It falls much less than what the overall market also falls. So I think in terms of that journey, we have focused on being on the positive side of the high quality businesses and management, and that has actually helped us in navigating the crisis well, is what I would say. Yeah, I think that has sort of helped us during that phase, and I think that is what we would like to sort of continue even in future, despite the environment. I think the best way to deal with these times is to be with the right types of businesses. The second thing which I wanted to highlight here is, in the midst of that worst day of the pandemic, when the markets, you mentioned the date when it actually hit the lows, we were not aware as to, because again I said this was unforeseen, we were not aware as to how the events will turn out. And only thing what we had in mind is that the valuations have become very, very attractive as far as the mid caps and small caps are concerned. And for all the investors knowledge, let me mention that our DSP small cap fund was shut for flows because of the higher valuations. We had shut the fund in 2017. And the decision we took that day was to sort of open the fund on the premise that the valuations have become attractive, not knowing when things will turn, but definitely sure that, adversity is something which one should be utilizing to add more into equities. And that's what we did. We opened the fund for flows, and that's the action sort of during the midst of the worst phase is what we've done.
Right. So Vineet, when you opened this fund for investments and you saw the valuations attractive in the small cap segment, how did you approach the mid and small cap segment? What were the investment processes which you followed? Because still there was a lot of turmoil. I mean, we were in a pandemic, we are still in a pandemic, and a lot of confusion, and the repercussions of that confusion was also on the economic front. So how did you approach the portfolio construction when it came to mid cap, DSP mid cap and DSP small cap?
So I think pretty much the framework which we have followed, and I will just mention few important points. So I think as a matter of our focus, we keep looking at companies even from the mid and small cap space, companies which are leader in their own way, companies which have very strong competitive advantage, companies which are less levered or they have less debt in the balance sheet, companies which generate good cash flows, and we have a threshold for long-term ROEs, which is upwards of, let's say, 15 or 16%. So I would say that this is something which this has sort of helped us in maintaining a very robust portfolio during that phase. And also what we saw during the last 1 year is well organized and companies and companies which are sort of across the categories, mid cap, small caps, or large cap, which are well organized, which are leaders in their own categories. They have done really well in the last 1 year. So they came out uh, quite less unaffected versus some of the smaller unorganized type of companies. And I think that is how we've sort of thought about in terms of the portfolio of stocks. And this is not to deal with the pandemic. I think this is the way of life for us when it comes to stock selection. And I think that has helped us over a long period of time to, let's say, do better than the benchmark, which is sort of our objective as well.
So typically, you're a bottom-up approach. When you follow a bottom-up approach, what were the selection parameters you were carefully looking at while adding these stocks?
So, as I mentioned, I think as far as these companies are concerned, each of these companies, first of all, from the business perspective, the business needs to have a good opportunity for, growth over the next few years. Typically, when we follow buy and hold approach, we buy companies and hold it for more than 3 to 4 years. Our average turnover ratio is pretty low. So when we are buying for that long period, we need to own businesses which does have an opportunity which will last for more than 4 to 5 years. So that's one important matrix. After having established that fact, the other important matrix is what is the right to win for the company in consideration. When I say right to win, it needs to demonstrate a clear competitive advantage over its peers, and that is demonstrated by way of either a strong brand, a low cost, much wider distribution, innovation, whatever that may be. And it needs to be a sustainable competitive advantage, because this is a world of disruption. The businesses are getting disrupted very fast. Once we establish that, then we look at the important financial metrics to establish whether these financials are also validated by the numbers, wherein we like to see that the company in consideration needs to outperform its peers in terms of the growth, in terms of the cash flow generation, in terms of their ROCE and ROE. And also we do some of the forensic checks to make sure that the companies in consideration are not having any issues relating to corporate governance or leakages or some of those, because this is a category which is also fraught with a lot of risks. So I think that is an important matrix to look at. And to add to all of this is, I think the most important qualitative matrix for us is a very high quality management, which we keep seeking, because we believe that the long-term success for any company depends upon a good capital allocation by good management. And once we have established that fact, looking at the past many years of track record, I think that's the, in a way, success mantra for us. And then what is left is a valuation. At what valuation do you want to buy? I mean, generally, in reasonably bull phase, these companies will be available expensive. So you may want to stagger or wait for a right price point. But in periods where the markets are going through the turmoil, I mean, those are the periods when you can actually load up a lot, because these companies are also available at reasonably well valuation.
Right. So your DSP small cap fund, I've been observing, lagged in terms of wealth creation compared to its peers and its benchmark. So what went wrong with that fund? Where did you go wrong in that stock picking, or you are staying, you feel that your convictions will come true in time to come?
So I would say that this is again typical of the market phase we are into, and what we are observing is since let's say September of last year, when the first vaccine announcement came, I think the whole cycle of the market has actually changed towards companies and stocks which are, let's say, more cyclical or more value oriented, which have been favored. After February or March, I'm also witnessing there is a lot more drift which is taking place towards the low quality companies as well. And this is also, you can also corroborate the this fact from The other aspect, which is wherein, today we are seeing that the non-institutional composition of the market has gone up significantly. So,
Right.
the retail participation, I made some observation that, pre-pandemic last year, the overall market turnover used to be, let's say, 40,000 odd crore, of which 50% used to be non-institutional, roughly. Today, I think we are talking about the turnover upwards of 70 or 80,000 crore, and the retail participation is also very high, 60-70% of that turnover. So I think what is happening is that there is definitely a lot of euphoria. There is a drift in terms of the quality, which is also a worrying signal. And we have seen similar phase in 2017, where during that fag end of that bull market, similar changes were happening, and we underperformed during that phase. But year after that, we had reasons to cheer, because we were able to narrow the gaps because of the again the fundamental rally which followed that junk rally in a way. So I would say that sometimes it's okay to underperform in such frenzied market, just that we don't want to commit mistakes which will cause us capital loss by investing into businesses we don't like. So it's matter of patience. We would like to sit through this phase. Some corrective actions needed. There definitely we are taking those. But on the whole, not trying to digress in terms of the quality. So that's the other thought.
Correct. The RBI made an observation in its annual report that the asset price inflation or rising stock markets in the times of GDP contraction poses a risk for or a bubble of a bubble. Do you think there is enough margin of safety, or the markets are very overvalued? And how are you approaching the equity markets right now, particularly the mid and small cap segment, at these levels of 53,000 on the Sensex?
So I think there's no doubt to say that markets have really turned a bit more expensive than their historical range. So if we were to just look at the average valuation zone for the markets, I think clearly the markets are 1 or 1.5 standard deviation higher than those historical range. And the mid and small caps are let's say even more expensive today, given the outperformance they have seen in the last 1.5 year.
Right.
So I think that is the fact which we are sort of dealing with, and I think it is not, not in isolation. We are seeing such valuation excesses taking place even in the international markets today, particularly US, China, where there is a lot of euphoria which is there across the board.
So is this sort of a bubble, because the economy is still about 1.6% GDP growth, and the markets are going up? Is this a sort of a bubble, because the RBI is also observing poses a risk of a bubble? That's what they say.
I would say till it burst, you will never know whether it is bubble or no. But there is some amount of artificial built-up in terms of valuation just taking place, which is cause of worry. More importantly, I would say beyond let's say the price inflation, I would say in what quality of businesses the price inflation is happening, that is also very important. Right. If it starts spreading to companies and businesses which really fundamentally doesn't warrant to be where it is, I think that is something which one should be worried about. Because when the the adjustments will take place, or when these imbalances will get cleared in terms of the corrections, these will see much sharper corrections, and that's where I would imagine that today retail investor is sort of participating, and that will be a cause of worry for them. So more importantly, I would be worried on that. Not so much worried if it is broader correction. It is okay. Good companies correcting is a good signal. We get an opportunity to buy, because we know for sure that these will come back. So the way to deal with hypervaluation in some of the good businesses is to just stay put for longer than what you might have sort of started off with. because over a period of time, as growth keeps coming by, the valuations keeps normalizing.
Right.
So I think that's a way to deal with hypervaluation. But I would be more worried on the low quality bubble, which is sort of don't know how it will sort of correct, and how it will result in the sentiments of the small investors actually changing towards the market. So that's the worry.
Medical experts are pointing at a third wave sometime in August, September this year. And we already have the Delta Plus variant in India, about 40 cases of the Delta Plus variant. We already have cases in Maharashtra and other states. Do you see these waves of COVID-19 and the lockdowns and restrictions which will be imposed upsetting the India's growth story?
See, the way we have sort of contextualized our thought around the growth over the next maybe 5-7 years is that broadly pandemic is one of the important reasons. But since let's say 2 years back, when the government first announced their decision to cut the corporate tax rate, I mean, the intention was clear that they want to push the private sector and they want to push the growth in the economy. And it was followed by the structural reforms like PLI, and now through the pandemic, the focus is more on spending, which will push the growth. So I think as compared to the first phase, where I would say it was more cleansing, led by the demonetization, GST, IBC, now it is more about growth. So somewhere I think fundamentally we are sort of putting those sort of aspects which will sort of drive growth for the economy over the next few years. And good part is that as far as the economic status is concerned, we are today lying low in terms of our growth curve. So I think from here we are looking a bit more in optimism that for the next 5-7 years we'll have growth. Now, to think about the third wave, so I think particularly with the third wave, I would say that it was the first wave which was more sort of dampening and impacting, and because nothing was known then. And now I think we are well prepared. The vaccination has also picked up quite a bit. So in a way, and companies frankly have really come out well after the first wave. So I would say that in terms of preparedness, are we well prepared to deal with the third wave? I think we are well prepared, and this is not going to go. I think what we understand from the medical experts is that this is something which we'll have to deal with and be with it in a way. And who knows? It is equity market. If not third wave, something else will come and hit. The interest rates, the inflation, whatever can come and actually hit you. So so in a way, I think as as an economy, as the equity markets, we have to deal with these volatilities, and the best way is to not worry about what's going to hit you, but be prepared and deal with the situation as it comes. And I would give almost good marks to all the corporates who have dealt with the pandemic well. So hence, not worried as much. We'll have bouts of volatility with the third wave, the impact, lockdown, and all of that. But I think those will be sort of taken in its own stride, and we will move on.
Right. So as we navigate these waves of COVID-19, which sectors or themes, in your view, will be laggards and which one will be ultimate winners?
So, see, I would say in terms of the segments broadly, we focused again on companies and businesses which has good opportunities for growth over the next few years, and also businesses which can keep growing in a very capital efficient manner. So I think broadly those metrics is what we believe in, and just filtering those metrics and looking at the segments which does showcase us the potential. I would say that the banking sector is something which we are getting more positive. I would say we were a bit skeptical as the pandemic hit, because we felt that the impact on the banking sector, quality of assets, will be much severe than what they have actually shown. So I think they have been able to pull up a good sort of a position for themselves, so which is a positive signal. Banks have raised capital. They are, they have well oiled in terms of the capital. Their provisioning is adequate, and hence that's one sector. As the economy revives, there is a cyclical revival which drives the banking sector. So I think selectively we are looking at the banking sector. The second is, what I mentioned about the growth metrics. I think the growth in India now is going to be driven more by the capex and the push from the government, the PLIs and all of that. So in the same breath, I would say the segments which are going to see the first benefits will be the ones which deal with these segments, or which benefits because of the overall spends taking place in the economy. So I would say the likes of, the cement, engineering, those are the businesses which we are sort of looking positively. Beyond that, I would say we are generally a long-term positive view we have on the healthcare sector, because we believe that that sector is, more like a consumer sector, where the demand is more non-discretionary in nature. And there are metrics which makes us believe, given the aging population, the penetration, all of that, the overall growth for many years is going to continue. So I think that's one sector which we like. Plus, the capital efficiency is very good. Their cash flow generation is good. And lastly, I would say the broadly consumption as a theme, both discretionary and non-discretionary, I would say that would follow the economic revival taking place, aided by the government capex and all of that. So probably in terms of their cycle, probably they will be lagging the growth metrics, but definitely they we have those metrics present out here. So consumption is both discretionary and non-discretionary, something we like, but the way to play those categories is to be be conscious of the valuations. Today the valuations are slightly expensive, so we would like to look at them in weakness, and that's what we believe. And there's one more last probably theme is the agri theme, which is something we believe there is a huge opportunity as far as India is concerned, and that's something which companies which are going to benefit out of that theme is something which we are looking at positively.
Right. So in FY21, CPI inflation averaged at about 6.19%, higher than the RBI's upper tolerance limit. And even in May 2021, the reading came at 6.3%, a 6-month high, due to higher food prices, higher fuel and light prices, and other constituents of the CPI, of the Consumer Price Index. The RBI, however, has maintained a status quo. Do you think that these RBI's accommodative monetary policy stance will somehow turn counterproductive at some point in time? Also, how are you approaching at the rate sensitive sectors like consumption and even the other ones like agriculture, credit? How are you approaching these sectors? Because ultimately, if rates are going to increase, there are brakes going to be put on consumption, because anyway, people cannot afford today a high interest rate to be paid.
So I think you are absolutely right, Ronak. I mean, these are times where we are seeing inflection happening on these parameters, which were very supportive till now. I mean, we were having very low inflation, interest rates were supportive. And if you ask me, have we reached the bottom of the interest rate curve? We have. Now it is just about the timing when we start, seeing the interest rate start moving up. Right. Now there are, 2-3 important metrics which I wanted to, share my thoughts out here. So one important matrix is that, there is, when the actually growth picks up, definitely it is also it drives inflation in the economy, and some bit of that initial inflation is also good because it gives that feel good factor. Generally, the profits for the businesses are going up, people are doing well, and the pricing power is slightly better. So I think the initial phase of inflation is still okay and may not hurt as much. But if the inflation persists and the interest rate keeps going up, that is something in the second stage. It will start dampening the sentiments. It will start hurting the demand. Secondly, on inflation itself, the jury is still not out yet. I mean, I would say that largely, if we see globally, the rise in commodity prices, is also one of the important reasons which is feeding inflation across the board. The what we have observed post the pandemic is that the supply chains have got disrupted, and the demand, suddenly there was a pent up and huge resurgence in demand after the first wave. So whether the inflation is sort of a result of the supply constraint plus a very strong demand momentum, which demand itself, let's say, could normalize once the pent up, the satiation of the demand takes place, and then you have normalization of demand, and then also as the supply chain actually again sort of is normalizing, more production and supply start, and that will redefine how we are thinking about inflation. So I would say that I think those metrics are still to be thought about in terms of, are we calling it a structural or more transient. We would see, I think 6 months, 8 months, I think picture will be clear. But you're right. I think interest rate is something which is now inflecting, and it's a matter of time. So let's see how finally it works out.
Right. What will be your advice to Robinhood investors or newbies who have been participating equity as an asset class through either direct equity, that is stocks, or mutual funds, for better wealth creation, of course, as perhaps the returns offered on some of the traditional investment instruments look unappealing. But the number of demat accounts have touched a record high of 14.2 million in FY21 amidst the pandemic, and the equity mutual funds have also reported a sizable number of inflows. So are investors right in going gung-ho on equity when the Indian equity markets is already at an high and these risks at large persist?
So the problem of generally talking positive on equity is that it keeps raising the sentiment, and people keep buying and buying again and again. I mean, and they're we are getting into that loop where the low quality, high valuation bubble is also getting created. So I think aside of that, fundamentally, if you ask me as a equity investor who's tracking the market for many years, I would say that equity generally they have the credentials or the inherent ability to beat inflation, because the pricing power is visible in the products which the companies are selling, where they have a decent product with good appeal. So I would say over a long period of time, investments into equities definitely is a good way to beat the inflation, which is the key important objective of any investor. I mean, while investors keep looking at and comparing each and every fund, and they keep comparing many assets and look at the return, but I would say broadly the key objective is to keep beating the inflation over a long period of time. Equity also as an asset class is a long-term asset class. Just that the prices are available daily doesn't mean that you have to go and act daily. I mean, once you buy a house, you don't keep looking at prices daily because it's not something which you want to sort of trade in and trade out. So I think as a temperament, as a philosophy, the investor should think about equity as a long-term asset class. It will keep sort of delivering its to its expectation in terms of beating the inflation. That's one thing which I am very sort of confident and sure about. And there will be periods like now where we are in a very expensive zone. So what do we do? I think the way to beat the expensive zone is to temper down the return expectation in the near term, and just extend the holding period for long term, but do not break the asset allocation discipline which you have been following. So if you
what should be the asset allocation for retail investors, for example? How can they be smart and prudent investors where they invest in equity but have a fair asset allocation and make investing a habit? How can they do that?
It again sort of varies with each different individual, because each will have their own risk metrics which may be different, levels different. But I would broadly say that someone, let's say, who is young and also for the young couple who have newborns in their family, I think the best thing is to start off with the SIP. For the younger ones, I would say the equity should have a higher proportion in their mix, let's say upwards of 60-70% of the total investable asset what they have. And then within that, the allocation to mid cap, small caps, hybrid balance. I mean, those will depend clearly on their ability to sustain the volatility as well. But broadly, that should be the consideration. And then beyond that, I think you have a lot of avenues now. So one would want to invest into gold, real estate. There are even financial products which gives that ability to invest into those. Plus, the good thing now is that with many of Indian schemes providing avenues to invest into international companies, I think is becoming a very relevant asset class, because that allows one to diversify the overall asset and looking at the international companies as well. So I think that those are the various ways in which the investors can look to diversify. But again, need to understand their risk matrix clearly before finalizing their asset allocation mix.
So my final question, which are the 3 books or blogs on investing that you follow and you would recommend to investors?
So see, what has actually helped me a lot is in the initial period, I think one anyways, your practical experience is nothing can beat that, and your mistakes are definitely a source of good source of learning is what I would say. That's something which is very important. But beyond that, I would say what has actually helped me is in the initial phase, reading the philosophy of Warren Buffett. And then somewhere down the line, Peter Lynch was very practical approach to looking at businesses and companies which I like. So I think those have helped me in shaping the basic fundamental framework for what needs to be followed to select right companies and avoid accidents. So that's one important matrix. And of late, I think. I've started. I may not read all of the blogs, but I like how Howard Marks actually articulates his thoughts. So I think those are important. And nowadays there are many blogs and information pieces available, and there are really good investors who write well and articulate well. But these are some of the ones which have actually helped me in let's say thinking about equities or navigating in difficult times actually.
Right. All right. Thank you, Vineet, for your valuable time and insights. I'm sure the investors will immensely benefit from your views, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank
you.
you very much, Ronak, and all the best to you and all your investors.
Thank you so much.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risk. Read all scheme related documents carefully.